Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Thursday, December the 11th, 2025. Mercury moves into Sagittarius today, and we also have a last quarter moon, and these two events are relatively important, and I think they deserve some comment. But before I go into these two events in detail, I want to consider the astrology and the I Ching for the day. So here is the chart for Thursday, December the 11th, set for noon. And one thing we can see is that the moon is in Virgo, still in Virgo. So there it is, the moon, noon New York time at 18:03 of this sign. By the way, don't forget to like and subscribe if appropriate. And the moon is conjunct the south node. So when you've got the moon conjunct the south node, there is a possibility that certain aspects of the sign Virgo may not be constructive. So there's a possibility of a moon conjunct Virgo that we might concentrate on the wrong things. We might not be able to see the wood for the trees. We might decide that we really have to focus on one particular detail and we just miss out on the larger picture. So while I think it's useful for the moon to be in Virgo, we need to make sure that things don't get out of control. It's good, of course, that we attend to things, that we make sure that everything gets noticed. But, everything gets noticed. If we just notice one thing and miss out everything else, well, it's as good as useless. And yeah, the South Node just might encourage us to be too focused on things that in the grand scheme of things might be fairly trivial. Now the moon does make a couple of squares. So the moon is making a square to Venus at the beginning of the day, and then the moon makes a square to the sun, hence the last quarter moon. So moon in Virgo plays Sun and Venus in Sagittarius. So, there's a bit of a conflict there between the Virgo principle and the Sagittarius principle. So that perhaps reinforces what I've just been saying. If we just concentrate on what we can see right in front of us, we might miss something out. So that's something that I think we do need to be aware of. Although in a general sense, you could say moon square Venus might be about overdoing it in certain areas. There's one thing which we decide is important and we might put a lot of resources into it, perhaps emotional resources, but I don't think that would be particularly constructive. And Venus is also making a square to the nodal axis. Yesterday the Venus was square the nodal axis. It's still square the nodal axis. When you're talking about the nodal axis, there are always two ways of looking at the nodes. One way is I won't say the traditional way because probably chronologically it's actually later, but the more usual way of looking at the nodes is to think about karma and where we're going to, where we're coming from. And so perhaps you could say Venus square the nodes. You could say, well, maybe it's all about who we hang out with. Some people are constructive. Some people show us the way forward. They are the future. Other people are the past. And so maybe we have to make that distinction. And so that is an approach to the nodes, looking at it in terms of our destiny. There is another way of looking at the nodes, the approach used by the German schools, the midpoint schools, whether it's Eberton or whether it's Witte, seeing the nodes as being about a contact. So Venus square nodes, regardless of any ideas about karma or destiny, just can be about contacts. And in that case, well, it kind of comes back to the same thing. The people we are in contact with do matter. and Venus, simply a Venus node aspect, regardless of whether it's stressful or not, can be about people. And it is important that we think about who we are meeting, over the course of the day. And the perhaps most important event today is Mercury moving into Sagittarius. So Mercury moves into Sagittarius, relatively late in the day. So if you're in London, for example, Mercury will move into Sagittarius at 20 to 11 in the evening. If you're in Paris, it would be 20 minutes to midnight. If you're in Asia, Australia, New Zealand, then the moon will move into Sagittarius tomorrow. If you're in the Americas, then that movement sort of takes place this afternoon or early evening. So that there is a bit of a difference there. But certainly in the Americas, there is this change of Mercury moving into Sagittarius, and I will be talking about Mercury moving into Sagittarius in more detail later. But suffice it to say that it's a bit of a two-edged sword. I mean, Mercury is going out of Scorpio. Some of us might be sick of Mercury in Scorpio, and Mercury in Sagittarius sounds fun. Finally, things are starting to move. Mercury's in a fire sign. It's going to be the fourth traditional planet in a fire sign. We've already got Mars, Sun, and Venus in a fire sign. Now we're going to have Mercury there as well. So real Sagittarius emphasis. Trouble is, Mercury is in its detriment in Sagittarius. And so when Mercury moves through Sagittarius, it can be a time when we sort of jump to conclusions, when we don't think things through. Mercury likes to be able to sort through the facts, work out what works, what doesn't. But then you move into Sagittarius. It can be difficult. And as I've said, we have got a last quarter moon, and last quarter moon is about the overall lunar cycle. We had the full moon a week ago. Last quarter moon might be a feeling that there is some kind of action is required. Something has to be done. Something has to be resolved. What was this lunar cycle all about? We have to work that out, and we can't hang around forever. And also, just before Mercury moves into Sagittarius, it makes a trine to Neptune. So Mercury trine Neptune, for some of us, may be the defining aspect of the day. And sort of Mercury in Scorpio, trine Neptune in Pisces. It can be about sensitivity. It can be about how we communicate. There are many ways of communicating. And perhaps Mercury trine Neptune talks about things which are more subtle, maybe which verge on the telepathic, and so perhaps we can just pick up body language, things which aren't immediately obvious. And this might also say something about the best way to communicate. Maybe if we are trying to say something, we don't have to be really sort of in your face. We can be subtle. We can use nuance, and so we don't have to sort of blurt it out. And it might take longer to get the message across, but it might also be more effective. So that's the picture for New York. I'm sure there are other things I could be talking about, but this is just a brief overview. Moving on to Sydney, Australia. So Sydney, Australia at noon. The moon is earlier in the sign. It's at 9 degrees Virgo. So probably the main aspect is a square to Venus. And we've also got that Mercury opposition Uranus. The thing about Mercury opposition Uranus is that Mercury is it's a planet of communication, and it's a planet talking about how we talk, how society communicates. And while we're on the theme of Australia, I noticed that there is this new piece of legislation comes in, which I think, I don't really know the full details, but if you're a minor, you're not allowed to use social media. It sounds an extraordinary thing, and that started at midnight. Was it midnight on December the 10th? And so it's kind of interesting that that's happening while Mercury is opposition Uranus. You associate Mercury opposition Uranus with freedom, but Mercury in Scorpio opposition Uranus, in this case, it's the government saying that minors can't use social media. I'm sure there are plenty of advantages of minors not using social media, and needing digital IDs or however it's enforced. But I think that is potentially quite a dangerous policy. By the way, I think this is a chart for the social media ban. So this is, I think it happened. I've said it for Canberra. I think it took place then at local time. So interestingly, at Canberra at midnight, on December the 10th, 2025, the moon was exactly on the ascendant, and there's the Mercury-Uranus opposition. That Mercury-Uranus opposition, I think, is interesting, and I think it's certainly something dramatic taking place to the way to society in terms of how it communicates, but it also may be about the response. And I think perhaps in a few days' time I will look at this social media ban and perhaps Australia as a whole in more detail, because I haven't really kept up with the news in Australia. Not that I'm ever really able to keep up with the news in Australia, but I know some of you are from Australia, so I thought that might be something I do sort of need to cover sooner rather than later. So looking at the heliocentric view, looking at the position of today's planets from the perspective of the Sun, putting the Sun at the center of the solar system, where of course it should be, Saturn and Neptune are making an exact conjunction. Saturn and Neptune are both at 1 degree 14 minutes Aries. This conjunction has been exact for some time. I've been talking about it for ages, but now it's here. And this conjunction only happens once. Remember, this is a heliocentric conjunction. Planets do not go retrograde heliocentrically. And so I've already said with Saturn and Neptune, it can be about uncertainty. It can be about fear of the unknown. We're trying to become part of something larger than ourselves, but at the same time, we are feeling that we don't want to give something away, that we might be compromising our individuality with the Saturn-Neptune conjunction. So we have to create boundaries, just as these boundaries are being perhaps undermined. This is not really an individual aspect, because it is heliocentric. Of course, geocentrically, we've also got Saturn-Neptune conjunction. But I think that we are living in a world where there is a lot of uncertainty, and Mars continues to make a square aspect to that Saturn and Neptune. So Mars is moving towards. It's not moving towards anything now. Mars has made the heliocentric square to Saturn. It's already made the geocentric square to Saturn, but it's still pretty close to the Saturn-Neptune conjunction. Of course, Mars is moving towards a square with Neptune geocentrically, and I'll be talking about that in a few days' time. But I think that could be about putting one's energy maybe into the wrong things, getting distracted and thinking something looks fun and glamorous, and then we have to think, is that right? Is that really the right thing to be doing? So I can talk about other things, but I think the main thing to say about the heliocentric picture today is that Saturn and Neptune are making an exact conjunction. So now I want to switch to the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Thursday, December the 11th, 2025. Aries. So the moon is moving through Virgo, and now perhaps it's becoming quite clear that it really is moving through this sign. And so from your perspective, with the moon moving through Virgo, you might find yourself being distracted by small things that you possibly are not interested in, or normally wouldn't be interested in, but you find yourself expending a lot of energy into sorting things out, making sure that all the details are in good order, and it potentially could be quite exhausting. And you might think, Aries, that you've got this to do and you've got that to do, and you might have in your head some kind of a list, and it's kind of annoying, but perhaps it all feels like it's down to you. So if you do get into that situation, you feel kind of obliged, whatever that obligation is, perhaps you should think about the matter again. It's not necessarily as pressing and serious as it seems, and if you were to get overwhelmed by obligation, you might actually do the opposite of what you're trying to achieve. You might actually end up doing nothing, or you might spend all your time today doing one thing which may not be particularly important. I mean, it may seem important, but after the event it might seem, well, to be frankly, a waste of time. And so don't fall into that trap. I think you need to keep thinking, keep looking, keep watching, and remember, Mars, your ruler, is still in Sagittarius, and with Mars in Sagittarius, reasonably close to the galactic center, it is a placement for Mars which is about being open-minded, thinking about new possibilities. And if you're just focusing on one thing, well, you are completely limiting yourself. And I'm not absolutely saying this is going to happen. It needn't happen. Rather than worrying about making sure that everything is absolutely perfect, try to let go. Try to get into the broader picture. And I think that if you can do that, then things are going to be much easier. And don't get too worried. It's easy to get worried. There are things that need to be sorted out, that need to be resolved. Yeah, sure, they're important, but they don't want to, or they shouldn't completely define you. That's absolutely not what you want. And one reason why there might be some concern is that at the beginning of a week, Mars was making a square to Saturn. At the end of a week, Mars is making a square to Neptune. So what's happening now? Mars is halfway between the square of Saturn and square of Neptune. And so that square between, well, it's a square towards the Saturn-Neptune midpoint, to be technical about it. It does mean there could be fear. Now, Aries is not known to be a fearful sign. Aries has got a reputation for being brave, maybe a bit gung-ho, but Aries is the one who initiates. And so having this concern, wondering about whether or not it is the right thing to do, thinking about all the things that could go wrong, it could be something about your experience of today, maybe also of the whole week to some extent, because Mars making that square to Saturn, square to Neptune, it is uneasy. And so the question is, what might be holding you back? Well, I mean, it just could be your own fears. It may not be anything concrete, but you just feel that if you were to completely let go, well, what might happen? Well, anything could happen. But maybe the challenge here is to let go, but not to completely let go, because Mars is applying to a square of Neptune, and Mars square Neptune can encourage you to sort of go in the wrong direction, and that could be unfortunate. And So I think that you you have to be a little careful, but you do have to get the balance right. I mean, the most important thing, Aries, is to just tune into the fact that Mars is in Sagittarius. Just remember, Mars is in Sagittarius. It is absolutely not a time to be limiting yourself. And at the end of the day, Mercury also moves into Sagittarius. So there are going to be 4 planets in Sagittarius, and so with 4 planets in Sagittarius, this is a time, when you need to really broaden your horizons. And these 4 planets in Sagittarius, it's not going to stay like that for long, because don't forget, on Monday, the 15th, Mars moves into moves into Capricorn, and then you've only got 3 planets in Sagittarius. So take advantage of that Sagittarius emphasis. Do whatever is necessary to expand outwards, to see what is available. So it's perhaps a slightly complicated day, when there are things that might concern you. You may be very keen to get things right, but you don't want to get sidetracked. And so if you can just keep looking up, just keep remembering that there is an interesting world out there. Sometimes that world might be threatening, but there's plenty of opportunity, and there's plenty of things out there to really inspire you. Taurus. There may be a question, Taurus, at the moment about whether or not you're doing the right thing. You always try to do the right thing, but sometimes you could get distracted, and you might find yourself doing something that you later regret. And the reason I'm saying this is because Venus is your ruler, and Venus at the moment is making a square to the nodal axis. I mean, it was making a square to the nodal axis yesterday, and perhaps it's not quite as strong today as it was yesterday, but we've got the north node in Pisces, south node in Virgo, Venus in Sagittarius, and with Venus squaring a nodal axis, it just may be that you're aware of 2 choices. There is the right thing and a wrong thing, and Venus is an immutable sign, and so perhaps as you move through the day, you're constantly aware of that polarity. It might be a series of choices, a series of forks in the road, when you can go down one fork or the other fork, but it's not like the poem where you could where you've got an idea but you could do either. Just both of them are 2 different experiences. Which one you go for is up to you. It's not up to you. Well, of course it is up to you. We all have free will, but it does seem that one direction is good for you, is life affirming. The other direction is maybe it's easy, but it's not necessarily the right thing to do. And perhaps you have to avoid mindless selfishness, unthinking selfishness. I mean, selfishness that doesn't necessarily mean that other people get harmed, but you have an option and you go for the option that just seems safest, seems least challenging, seems just easier, where there's just a sameness to it. Doing something you've always done it. It's worked, so you might as well stay with it, and you don't have to worry about other people. You don't have to consider alternative viewpoints. You just do what comes apparently naturally. So there is that, but it doesn't necessarily get you anywhere. And the other alternative is to do what maybe is challenging, that puts you in a situation where things aren't clear, where you live with a certain amount of ambiguity. Now, ambiguity, Taurus, in a way is not desirable. We don't want things to be ambiguous. We want things to be as clear as possible, don't we? But sometimes things are just unclear, and that's just the way it is. And maybe you have to sort of live with that ambiguity, at least for a period of time. Things are not going to be immediately obvious. Yeah, you'd like them to be obvious. It would be easier in the short term if things were obvious, but I'm just not convinced that that is what you really need at the moment. So if you do find yourself in a situation where things aren't clear, where you don't understand what's going on, that doesn't mean that you should run a mile. You probably need to stay with it and do what you can to resolve your questions, to perhaps get some understanding of what's going on. And one way of gaining an understanding, is to ask questions and to explain what troubles you. And if you feel that someone is being, for example, obtuse, they're deliberately hiding things, don't be afraid of just turning up the volume a bit, saying what's on your mind, saying you're confused. And if you tell someone you're confused and you're honest about it, then you're likely to get the answers. And of course, that can sometimes be a temptation if we feel that we don't know what's going on. Some of us might be afraid of asking questions because we don't want to look stupid, but the stupid thing is not to ask. So if something isn't clear, that doesn't mean it should be avoided. It means you should understand what's going on. And if you do make the effort to understand what's going on, then I think that you can really make some good progress. And going back to this Venus and the nodes, so all of us have this this dichotomy, the right thing and the wrong thing. It's true for all of us, I think, and it's particularly true for you. And with Venus making the square, Venus in Sagittarius making the square to the nodes, it just may be that the answer here is almost a leap of faith. You are able to just move things to a new level. You perhaps have to explore your own emotions and the way you feel about something. And if you do that, you dig deep sort of emotionally, not just emotionally, but in terms of your inspiration and your ideas, and you perhaps go a little bit further than you have in the past, then you might find the answers. And so I talked about the importance of asking questions, but maybe the real answers can be found by asking questions of yourself. And if you can do that, then in the end it'll be very clear which fork in the road you should be taking. Or, it may not be as difficult to make a choice as it seems. And I think so if you've got a choice, choice A, choice B, and you're really honest with yourself, I think you'll be able to make the right choices. Gemini. Mercury is doing stuff. Of course, Mercury is your ruler, and when Mercury changes sign, it's important. And so we've got Mercury having been in Scorpio. I mean, it was in Sagittarius for a time, but it went retrograde, remember, and now it's going into Sagittarius. And early next month, beginning of 2026, Mercury will be in Capricorn. So it sort of moves through the Sagittarius relatively quickly, and so that is an important sign change, because Mercury says something about the way you express yourself. And so with Mercury in Scorpio, you may not have been your normal self. You could have perhaps been sort of more introspective than usual. You may have felt there were sort of, annoying little details to work out. You didn't really want to bother with them, but you had to. And Mercury moving into Sagittarius is not just about what it means for Mercury to be in Sagittarius. It's also about what it means for Mercury to be in Scorpio, and the fact that you're leaving some of that Mercury in Scorpio behind. The Scorpio season is now well and truly over, with Mercury moving into Mercury moving into Sagittarius. And when Mercury moves into Sagittarius, it does mean that you've got 4 planets in Sagittarius, and those 4 planets all in your opposite sign. You're a Gemini, 4 planets in Sagittarius, your opposite sign. That means there can be quite a big focus on other people and on relationships, partnerships. It's not all about you. And if you look at the shape of the horoscope now, it's very much towards one side now. I mean, look, you've got all these four planets towards the other side, the side away from Gemini. And yeah, that does maybe take away some of the focus from you. It's not all about your decisions. You have to consider what other people are doing, what other people want. Doesn't mean to say you have to give in to them, but with Mercury moving into Sagittarius, between now and the beginning of December, you just may find yourself having to consider other people, maybe more than usual. So that's a sort of longer term view. Short term, looking at what's happening over the course of the day. Mercury actually moves into Sagittarius quite late, at least from a European perspective. It moves into Sagittarius at 20 to 11 in the evening, London time, 20 to midnight in Paris or Rome or Berlin tomorrow morning, probably. I think tomorrow morning if you're in Australia or New Zealand. So it does depend, but if you're in the Americas, it will be this afternoon or early this evening. Mercury moves into Sagittarius. And so as far as what that means is, we still have to think about that last part of Scorpio, those last few arc minutes of Scorpio, just before Mercury moves into Sagittarius. And Mercury is making a trine to Neptune. And this trine to Neptune is quite emotional. It's quite sensitive. And so your sensitivity levels may actually go up over the course of the day. And you might find yourself becoming aware of things, even on an emotional level. You just pick things up, pick small details up that just other people miss. You don't even know how you pick these details up. It may just be a feeling. It may not be anything you see or hear. It's just something you feel. And if you do have a feeling, there's a good chance that it is a reasonably accurate reproduction of what is going on out there. So if you think about Mercury trine Neptune, it's sort of a classic way of looking at Mercury trine Neptune is to say, well, it's telepathic, extrasensory perception, picking up other people's thoughts and feelings. Maybe. If you had to give a description of Mercury trine Neptune, Mercury is about the way we communicate and the channels with which we communicate, and so information is coming in sort of in many different ways, and it could be inspiring. It could be confusing. That is the problem about the whole sort of psychic telepathic stuff. It all sounds very glamorous, but it can be overwhelming. Of course, in extreme situations, psychic ability can be the path to madness. Yeah, it's true, because you can't hold back what's coming in, and yeah, you can be overwhelmed. I'm not saying you will get overwhelmed. This is Mercury trine Neptune. It's quite a gentle aspect, and so if you start to notice things, if you start to feel things, Gemini, you don't want to be overwhelmed by it. And it's probably a bad idea to jump to conclusions. Your conclusions may not be right. Geminis, at some level, are looking for answers. They want a complete picture. They want everything to connect. But you can't force connections. And so just because something seems clear, perhaps because of this new channel of communication, doesn't mean to say that you do have a definite answer. That may not be the case. And also, Gemini, because you're starting to have quite a good awareness of other people at many different levels, provided you don't get confused, provided you keep a perspective on things. I think that you can today, develop, a real power. There's just something about you that is quite connected, and you're able to understand how to push forward, with your ideas, and maybe it's your understanding of other people which is going to help. If you understand your audience, then it does make things a lot easier. But if you do understand your audience, then that means that you can maybe manipulate your audience. If that's something that you want to do, if it is the right thing to do, and it is always important to think about, what is the right thing to do, and you need to think about the common good. But I think that probably with some effort you can understand what the common good is, and you can act in the common good. And it might mean that you have to make a statement, that you have to put yourself in a position where you can be seen and heard. Not necessarily as easy as it sounds, because at some level, Gemini, at the moment, you would like to fade into the background. You don't want too much attention. You might find that disturbing, but if you're getting too much attention, that might make you nervous. But it's going to be okay if you've got something useful to say. You've got something useful to say, and if you're able to take into account other people and their idiosyncrasies, then I think you're going to be okay, and you can make it clear to everyone who you are and what you want. Cancer. We are in a sort of last quarter stage of the lunar cycle. So we had a full moon. It was about a week ago. And now we've got the last quarter moon. I mean, that's why I've got a moon on a thumbnail. I think that is a last quarter moon. I mean, you can see pictures of last quarter moons and first quarter moons, and there will be a difference, but superficially one might seem the same as the other. But yeah, it is a last quarter moon. And so what does that mean for you? Well, it does mean that you might have a certain urgency, just a feeling that something needs to be done, that you haven't really got all the time in the world to finish it off. And and it is a time that many of us, I'm not a Cancerian, but many of us, or many, regardless of our sign, many people do feel a bit of a hurry, because time seems to move quickly at this part of the year. It's already moving into mid-December. Early December becomes mid-December, then it's Christmas, and then it's a new year, and you've got perhaps Christmas obligations, and I don't know, buying things, preparing things, or maybe there's something else, nothing to do with Christmas, whatever it is, and you feel that urgency, at least in one department, and it's not an extreme urgency yet, but you kind of know that this is the last chance to do something in a way that is orderly, without sort of crazy panic. So think about perhaps your main priority. What is it, and then sort it out. And that should be the first thing that needs to be done. With this first quarter, with this last quarter moon. And at the same time as all of this, we've got Mercury moving into Sagittarius. So, Mercury moving into Sagittarius, in one sense, it's not especially important. I mean, it's going to affect all the 12 signs. I wouldn't have said Mercury moving into Sagittarius is going to have a huge impact on you, but there are perhaps a few things to be said about it. Mercury has been in Scorpio. Scorpio as a sign, from a Cancerian perspective, it can be quite a playful sign. It is about your creativity and what is important to you. And so not so long ago, there were a lot of planets in Scorpio, and I'm hoping, Cancer, that was a time when you were able to really tune into who you are and what you were capable of doing. And now that Mercury is leaving Scorpio, perhaps you're feeling that creativity is just not quite enough. You have to go further. It's all very well being brilliant, doing something that is integral to who you are, but is that enough to see it through? You need to perhaps do the groundwork, and perhaps that's what Mercury moving into Sagittarius is about. Now you've got 4 planets in Sagittarius. Sagittarius is a sign that doesn't necessarily sit easily with Cancer. I mean, Cancer and Sagittarius are very different signs, and so Cancer, you may just feel that something isn't quite right, and if something isn't quite right, you will know, if you think about it, what needs to be done to put things back on the straight and narrow. So Mercury may say something about the organizing principle, and the organizing principle may become quite strong with Mercury moving into Sagittarius, and you do have ideas about the way things should come together, and it's going to be important, I think, that you're able to act quickly on these ideas. I know that Cancer sometimes has a reputation for being slow and wanting to think things through, or certainly feel things through, but some things are going to be obvious, and if things are obvious, then why hesitate? Why delay? And this goes back to the fact that we've got a last quarter moon. With a last quarter moon, then action is required. Really, the sooner the better. So sorry to be a bit judgmental there. I mean, I'm not being judgmental here. I'm just trying to sort of interpret the planets and what's going on, and I'm kind of suggesting that there is an approach that you should be adopting. But there are other things going on. We do have a trine between Mercury and Neptune. So this Mercury trine Neptune, it is in water signs, and so so Mercury, just before it moves into Sagittarius, makes a trine to Neptune, and I've already said that this Mercury trine Neptune can be quite sensitive, even can be telepathic, and so Mercury and Neptune are, in a way, they're trining Cancer. Cancer is the 3rd water sign, Neptune in Pisces, Mercury in Scorpio, then Cancer, and of course you've got Jupiter in Cancer as well. So that means, Cancer, that I think you're going to be quite sensitive. I think that your psychic abilities are going to be on pretty good form, and you're just going to pick things up in a very easygoing way. I don't think you have to make much of an effort. So if you don't understand something, you want to understand something, listen to your feelings. Your feelings are fine-tuned most of the time anyway, but with this Mercury trine Neptune, some answers might be coming your way. Now, you don't have to necessarily reach definite conclusions as a result of these answers, although you mustn't forget that now in general is a time for action with this last quarter moon, and it may be that something you sense gives you the last piece of information, the final piece of information you need in order to make a clear decision. Leo. Mercury is getting ready to move out of Scorpio, and if you're in the Americas, well, late afternoon, early evening, Mercury moves out of Sagittarius. It happens much later in the day if you're in Europe, but Australia tomorrow. But the point is, Mercury is leaving Scorpio, moving into Sagittarius, and there was a time not so long ago there were loads of planets in Scorpio, and this is relevant for the average Leo, because with all those planets in in Scorpio, there could have been times where, you felt that you're being weighed down. There were things holding you back, and I don't think that those things holding you back was nothing external. I think you just weren't in the mood. I think you were holding yourself back, and there were things you needed to work out on your own. You needed your space. You perhaps wanted to spend more time at home than usual. But planets are moving out of Scorpio, and we've already got Venus, Sun, Mars out of Scorpio into Sagittarius, or Mars is in fact about to move into Capricorn. But now Mercury is that final planet, and so this perhaps represents a time when you can start being more of an extrovert, more open-minded, better able to deal with the challenges of the world. Scorpio as a sign from a Leo perspective is at the bottom of the chart, and so you could say that last month or so might have been a time when you really wanted to be in a safe environment. You wanted to perhaps be somewhere where the seeds of your creativity could germinate, away from the bright lights. But now you've got things moving into Sagittarius, and of course they will now sort of keep moving up the chart. So when I say up the chart, what do I mean? Well, if you look at the chart and you put Leo on the left, then you can see that these planets, in Sagittarius, still quite close to the bottom of the chart, but they're moving up and up and up until you could say in theory, they reach the top of the chart, in spring or summer when they move into Taurus. And so, Leo, probably or hopefully you are starting to feel sort of more creative, and you perhaps now are aware that you can actually use your creativity. You don't have to be afraid of it. You can do something that is fun. It's important to really sort of enjoy yourself, and it may go further than that because we've got a last quarter moon. So the moon in Virgo is square the sun in Sagittarius. So when you got a last quarter moon, because a week ago we had a full moon, a last quarter means this is close to the end of a lunar cycle. In a week's time we've got a new moon, and so what are you going to do in this last quarter? What needs to be worked out? And perhaps, Leo, you're having to confront all the reasons you have given yourself for not doing something. There's always an excuse. There's always a reason. I mean, you are quite active. I mean, I'm not putting you down or anything. I'm just saying that, all of us have excuses. And, it's important at the moment, Leo, that you make the most of who you are. And that last quarter could be about an excuse, or it could be about confronting an obstacle. And it's possible that this obstacle does have a financial dimension. Moon is in Virgo. That is an earth sign, and it might be that you're thinking about money and how much money you've got and how much you're prepared to spend, and you're thinking, well, because you can't spend money, you can't do everything you want to do. And money is a constraint, but it is not a final constraint. If something needs to be done and it is essential to who you are, then there's always a way of doing it. And perhaps the financial reason for not doing it is just an excuse. There's maybe a way of doing it which can cost less money, perhaps no money at all. And how do you do that? How do you do what you want to do without spending money? Well, you use your imagination. You be flexible, and so through flexibility and creativity you can save yourself money, and indeed you may find that you don't have to spend any money at all. So it might be a time when you do need to work out your relationship to money, particularly in one area. And don't forget, the moon also is conjunct the south node. So with the moon making a conjunction to the south node, that kind of suggests to me that too much thinking about money, too much worrying about money may not actually be very constructive. it may take you in the wrong direction, and and instead you should be thinking about what you can do, and not being constrained by obsessions about material realities. And that's not the same as overspending. There's no reason to overspend. Absolutely not. In fact, if you use your imagination, you can quite possibly underspend. And also, Leo, in general, I think that you're able to come over very well. You come over as being an interesting and powerful and attractive person, and I think that people are going to like you. If you're not shy, you're very clear about who you are, then you will definitely be creating the right impression. Virgo. The moon is very much in your sign, and it's making a conjunction to the south node. It's also making a square to Venus. And I think this square between the nodes and Venus may be quite important. I mean, this square perhaps is trying to find a solution, a solution in terms of maybe working out what your direction is, what should you be doing. I mean, I've been talking about nodes square the Venus and what the nodes are all about, and of course the moon is tied up with this as well. And so Virgo, you may have to make a choice. There may be temptations, Virgo, to go backwards, to not just revisit the past, but to stay in the past. The past may feel a lot more comfortable than the present, and certainly the future. So do analyze your motivations. So as you go through the day, really think about what you're doing. And if you look at yourself and you observe your actions, then you might notice that you're being perhaps too cautious. I'm certainly not advising you to take risks, but you're cautious in the sense that what you know is easiest. And it's not just what you know in terms of the facts, it's what you know in terms of learnt behaviors. It may be easier, for example, to put your own interests first. You might respond to a situation in a selfish way. For example, a big disaster happens. Not a big disaster. Something happens. I'm exaggerating. We're talking about a big disaster. Something happens, perhaps in a social situation, and how do you respond to it? And your first response, your automatic response, might be to do something which is protective of yourself. And if other people notice you being overly protective of yourself, rather than thinking about the wider communal interest, that may not go down too well. So certainly in terms of how you present yourself over the course of the day, I think it's going to be very important that you give the impression at least that you care about other people's interests, that you're putting other people's interests first. I mean, even if privately you're thinking the opposite, you really do need to think about those impressions. And so that may be part of the way the nodes are working. But with the moon conjunct the south node, you really may be pulled in the direction of selfishness, putting your own way, not just selfishness, but putting your own approach first, not maybe being inclined to listen. And instead, you should perhaps be thinking about the other side of things, the north node in Pisces. The north node in Pisces is the direction forward. And of course, the north node in Pisces, well, that does say something about other people. If you want to make progress, you have to consider other people, even if you want to make progress in a very selfish way. I mean, we live in a selfish world. You've got things you want to do. You want to be successful. You want to be more successful than everyone else. You want to stand out. Even then, you need to take into account other people. And other people have to be perhaps persuaded. You have to make an effort to understand what they want, and you have to be prepared to listen. I mean, you can listen. Virgos are very good listeners, but you have to really listen. And the nodal axis is squared by Venus. So you got Venus in Sagittarius square the nodes, and Venus might, to an extent, represent a solution to the issue. Venus could be about another person. It could be about a member of your family. Your family may provide a solution. Listen to what your family have to say. Take into account their needs. It doesn't take much. You just need to listen. Some small gesture, and that's all it takes. So if you can do that, then I'm fairly confident that things will really be okay for you, and you can make the right decisions. And just don't forget, impressions matter. I think impressions matter a lot today, and so do think about how you are presenting yourself. Think about what people are thinking about you. I'm not suggesting that you be completely self-conscious about the whole thing. If you just make an effort, a spontaneous effort, to think about other people, to listen to other people, to take into account their interests, then things should be fine. In fact, things can be more than fine. I think that you can really align yourself with the people around you, and you can give your popularity ratings a boost. Libra. There may be moments of uncertainty, and this uncertainty may come about because you're not quite sure what to do. As a Libran, you like to get things right, not just for yourself, but also for other people. And so what is it that you need to do? What is it that you must do? Well, there's nothing that you must do, but there's always a better way of doing things. You might have choices. A lot of people have choices. This is maybe a lot of what today is about, because you're not set on any particular path. You're moving forward, I hope, but you can move one way or you can move the other way, and this is a bit of an issue for Libra. I mean, Librans can be very indecisive. Not always. I mean, there are, of course, examples of decisive Librans. I mean, for example, Margaret Thatcher has a reputation for being decisive, but even then, she was decisive perhaps in a public setting, but I think privately, when there was a crisis, Falklands War, for example, she didn't really know what to do, not fully, and she did have to get advice, and so that indecision, may be with you today. And if we want to find some astrological symbolism for this indecision, I would have said it would be Venus square the nodes, square the nodal axis. Venus is, of course, your ruler. The nodes are all about direction. Are you going forward? Are you going backwards? Square is a stressful aspect. So you just might not be sure. Though, that there is a right and a wrong way of doing things, and you just find it difficult to work it out, and that is okay. Nothing is simple for any of us, and it's always worth spending a bit of time working things out. But maybe if you spend too much time, you might sort of miss a moment. And it could be, if we look at Venus, Venus in Sagittarius, that is your ruler. Venus maybe represents the answer, and Venus in Sagittarius means that you can perhaps have some kind of inspirational leap. You know, you look at things, you don't know which way to take things. You're not quite sure what to do, and then there just could be a moment where things just suddenly come together. You do some thinking, and you do more thinking, and one thing connects to another, and you do a bit of research, and suddenly it's obvious. And that's what you should be looking for. I mean, ideally, Libra, you're not going to take an action, and in taking that action, be worried that maybe you haven't got it right. If you have that worry, then perhaps you haven't got it right, or you're not ready to make a decision. So you need a bit of certainty. I know that certainty has a bad reputation. Nothing is certain. You know, we live in a post-truth era. We can't have certainty. But we can have subjective certainty. You can be sure that from your own perspective, it's right. You are absolutely doing the right thing. And there is perhaps, Libra, going to be a moment of action when you're absolutely sure that you're doing the right thing. And it's not just about today. And you know, we do have also Mercury moving into Sagittarius. So we're going to have 4 planets in Sagittarius. And, you know, think about Sagittarius. I mean, Sagittarius as a sign is, well, you think about Sagittarius, it's the archer. And the archer is able to go further because, you know, the archer can just fire an arrow, and the arrow can go, I don't know how far an arrow can go. It can go hundreds of feet. Maybe it can go across the next hill. Of course, you don't quite know what it's going to hit, but it's not what it's hitting that matters. The point is you are able to go further afield, and if you're doing something which is correct, which is in accordance with your destiny, you just know it. It's going to be absolutely clear. And perhaps as Mercury moves into Sagittarius, things are going to become increasingly clear. And the clearer you are, the clearer you're going to be able to express yourself. And I think at the moment, Libra, you can express yourself very powerfully. And maybe if you don't know what to do, perhaps the answer is to talk. If you talk, you get a response. And perhaps by listening to what other people are talking about, it all becomes clear. And there's really no space for continued confusion. You know, if things are just confused and it becomes confused for too long, then you're never going to get anywhere. You should be looking for clarity. And I really do think that at the moment, clarity is something that you really can find, and it's right in front of you. So once you have that clarity, you'll be able to make decisions, knowing with a degree of certainty that, you know, these decisions are absolutely correct. Scorpio. The Scorpio season has gone on for some time, so I hope you have enjoyed it. But now Mercury is leaving Scorpio, and that's it. You can see in the chart that the sign Scorpio finally is going to be a blank. That might sound sad, but on the other hand, it puts a bit less pressure on you. You know, with planets in Scorpio, it might have been the case that you felt that everyone was looking at you. It was down to you to make things happen. It was down to you to make the decisions, and at times it could have been exhausting. And so with Mercury leaving Scorpio, then that might be a bit of relief. You can you can step into the shadows to some extent. The spotlight is not all going to be on you. So that is a change that we've got with Mercury moving into Scorpio. But it does mean, of course, that we've now got 4 planets in Sagittarius. So we know 4 planets in Sagittarius. It's got to say something. And with 4 planets in Sagittarius, it can be a time when, you know, some Scorpios do have to put a fair amount of emphasis on the financial side of things. I mean, Sagittarius is a financial sign in the Scorpio chart, and you may be thinking about your money. Maybe you think you haven't got enough money. Maybe your money isn't doing enough. Maybe you're owed money. Whatever it is, and it's also with Sagittarius. It's perhaps a time when you're able to be quite imaginative with money. You can see how money can be used, or perhaps how money can be made in ways that may be slightly offbeat. I mean, Sagittarius is a sign which is far flung. It's the kind of a new horizons sign. So, as far as money is concerned, it's perhaps important not to be single-minded about it. You need to think about perhaps other possibilities. So you're not stuck in sort of any one groove as far as money is concerned. Yeah, you can change groove. Perhaps you can change groove in quite a radical way. I mean, I'm not encouraging you, by the way, to do anything risky or speculative. It's to begin with, is about having the right attitude, and also not listening too much to other people. I mean, it's not just about money. I think in general, certain other people are not going to be very helpful today. I'm thinking more of sort of friends, associates, colleagues, rather than partners, spouses. People in general may not be helpful. I mean, they have a lot to say. They do represent a certain pull, and you might be inclined to get sort of tied up with the group and the collective. But I think instead you do need to think about yourself and your own interests, and outside advice, again, particularly from your friends and associates, just may not be helpful, especially when it comes to money, by the way. And in fact, money could be a measure. What do I mean by that? If you're trying to evaluate something, even if it's got nothing to do with money, by looking at the financial dimension, that allows you to understand whether or not it's worth listening to. I mean, to take a trivial example, if people are talking about politics and ideas, if someone has a big idea, or wants to change the world in some way, or is talking about policy. I mean, I know you're not supposed to have discussions about religion and politics, but if you happen to be, you can judge the value of an idea by just thinking about the money. How much does it cost? Is it reasonable from a financial perspective? If it's not reasonable from a financial perspective, then the idea may not be any good. Further, if someone else is coming up with an idea that doesn't make financial sense, that may actually be a reflection on the person coming up with the idea. People with stupid ideas should maybe be avoided, especially if that stupidity has a financial dimension. I know that sounds horribly specific, but I think that's what the horoscope is saying. Of course, the horoscope is all about potential. There are many different potentials, and there's always a bit of exaggeration and hyperbole when I do my readings. I mean, there has to be. I mean, by definition, that's the nature of this sort of 12-sign astrology. It's kind of hyper real. It's not necessarily completely down to earth. That's the nature of the thing. So Scorpio, I think that the spotlight is away from you, and if the spotlight is away from you, that may give you sort of more time for thinking things through, but you don't want to think things through too much. And one problem you might have is that at the beginning of this week we had Mars square Saturn. At the end of a week we've got Mars square Neptune. So what's happening today, or in the midweek, we've got Mars halfway between the square of Neptune and the square of Saturn. In other words, Mars is squaring the Saturn-Neptune midpoint. And that might be connected with a concern. You might be worried about something, and your worry may be unreasonable. I mean, there's a lot of worry around. When I looked at the heliocentric chart, I pointed out that there's an exact Saturn-Neptune conjunction heliocentrically today. So you're perhaps picking up on that worry. And of course, too much worry could bring you to a standstill. I mean, you just don't know. You don't know what's going to happen. And you might feel that you have to protect yourself because you can just see how things could move from bad to worse. Now, it's always good to be cautious, but with Mars on the Saturn-Neptune midpoint, it just may be that you could be overly cautious, and you have to, think about your concerns and work out, what are real, and what are just, your imagination, going into overdrive. Sagittarius. Sagittarius is really getting a lot of attention at the moment. There are about to be 4 planets in Sagittarius, and not just any planets, 4 personal planets in Sagittarius. So Mercury is on the verge of moving into Sagittarius. If you're in the Americas, late afternoon, this evening, Mercury will move into Sagittarius. In Western Europe, late this evening, Mercury moves into Sagittarius. Okay, Asia, Australia, New Zealand, that won't be until tomorrow, but it is happening. So that is quite extraordinary. Now, I understand that it is the Sagittarius season. We often get a couple of planets in Sagittarius. Obviously, the Sun will always be in Sagittarius at this time of year. Mercury very often, Venus quite often. Mars is not tied to the Sun. So there's no reason why Mars should be in Sagittarius in December, because it's not like Mercury and Venus doesn't hug the Sun. So having 4 planets in Sagittarius is somewhat unusual, and it does put a great deal of emphasis on you. And this is your season. This is your time of year, and this 4-planet, what do you want to call it, a stellium? This 4-planet stellium in Sagittarius, it's not going to last forever, because Mars on Monday the 15th, Mars moves into Capricorn. So when Mars moves into Capricorn, you only got 3 planets. So between now, that would be sort of Thursday, if today's Thursday, so certainly Friday, Saturday, Sunday, those 3 days, you have got 4 planets in Sagittarius. So, what are you going to do about it? I mean, I think it's important that you make the most of it, and you really show the world, what you can do. It's not a time for being shy, for hiding your light under a bushel. You need to be open and clear about who you are, and don't be afraid of being unique. As a Sagittarian, you can be unique. You can grab everyone's attention, and you can come up with some very interesting ideas. But it's not just about ideas, it's about how you put ideas into action. So Sagittarius, I'm kind of suggesting there's an opportunity here. I'm not going to tell you exactly what that opportunity is, because that's for you to work out. And also today we've got the Moon in Virgo. So the Moon is in Virgo just as Mercury is getting ready to move into Sagittarius. So it's part of the same thing. And Moon is in a mutable sign. Sagittarius is a mutable sign. And from your perspective, the Moon in Virgo is about your ambitions, whatever it is that you're trying to achieve, and you have, I hope, a clear idea about what you want to achieve. And when with the Moon making a square to the Sun, well, that Moon square Sun is a last quarter Moon, and if we're talking about a last quarter Moon in Virgo square Sun in Sagittarius, we're talking about you feeling, I hope, that something needs to be done. It's very action orientated, because the lunar cycle we're in is going to end soon. It ends in a week. And if you wait a week, you wait until the new moon. Well, the new moon is going to create some new opportunities, but the current cycle we're in is about to end. So if you're working on something, you see that something is coming together, don't just wait, just put it into action. By the end of a week, ideally, today, Thursday, do something. I'm not saying do something you have to do it. I'm just trying to encourage you, because I think that things are coming together, and if you can just be as active and dynamic as possible, I think that would be really good. And it's not just the fact the moon is square the sun. The moon is also square square Venus, and so with moon square Venus, that indicates to me that you're going to be pretty good at projecting yourself outwards, getting people to sympathize with your viewpoint, and so you get real understanding from other people, and that's something you can work on. And you can understand them, they can understand you. I'm not saying it's going to be entirely easy. You do have to make a bit of an effort. I mean, Venus does square the nodal axis, and while it is certainly a time to be ambitious, you don't want to be crazy ambitious, just be ambitious for the sake of it. You've got to think also about your own foundations, what grounds you. And so if you can do that, then I think you're going to make the right choices. And also, Sagittarius, you're an exciting person, and you're someone who can initiate things. People are going to pay attention to you. People are going to remember you. So perhaps you should just take advantage of this opportunity while it lasts. Capricorn. There may be a feeling, Capricorn, that things aren't as clear as they should be. As a Capricorn, that's the way you'd like things to be. You want things to be straightforward. But the question is, how straightforward are they? And I don't think they are. I think that there's a lot going on, and there's a lot going on that you just don't necessarily understand. And when you're dealing with something you don't understand, there is a temptation to either ignore it or to reach your own conclusions. It makes things a lot easier if you can do that. But Capricorn, I think that would be a bad idea. Getting answers is good, but if answers aren't available, you can't push it. So it might be the case, Capricorn, that you have to live with a certain amount of confusion, knowing that there is something out there you don't understand. You can see it, you can interact with it, but getting under the surface, sort of getting into that black box, you're not going to get into that black box. You could try, you could make assumptions, you could have theories, but theories are going to get you nowhere. I mean, you're going to be quite into making theories right now. Maybe they're elaborate theories, maybe it all makes sense, but it's just an approximation of the truth to the truth, and it may not be the truth at all. And that is the way you should be handling today's events and today's energies, just living with that confusion. And in a way, that does make you very powerful. Very often the people who are most successful in life are the ones who don't come to conclusions, because they just know that things could go either way. They have a light touch, and the light touch can be very important at the moment. Never committing to anything, whether it's to an idea, an action, to a person, but just always keeping your options open. And if you can do that, then you may find that things really work very well for you. It's also not a time when you should be expressing opinions. I mean, ideally you should have no opinions at all. But if you do have opinions, well, firstly, you should be aware that these opinions may not be correct, or that they need to be adjusted. And secondly, what you should not do is tell people what you feel. And it may be that as soon as the words come out of your mouth, as soon as you start talking about what you believe, it may become obvious to you that you're not quite as sure of yourself as you thought you were. So that is a good reason for not being opinionated, and instead perhaps to be just working things out, amassing the facts, observing the facts, being interested by the facts, but just knowing that the connections are forming. You are making connections. Things are starting to make sense, but you're a long, long way from being in a situation where you can make firm conclusions. And that really is as simple as that, Capricorn. Just keep an open mind, and that is perhaps the secret for having a successful Thursday. Aquarius. I talked a lot about ambition over the last month or so. And the reason for that, Aquarius, was because there were a lot of planets in Scorpio. One time, just huge amount of planets in Scorpio. But now, Mercury is getting ready to leave Scorpio. There are about to be no more planets in Scorpio, and that can have an impact on you, Aquarius. You're perhaps going to be less single-minded, less sort of focused on just one thing. Remember, Scorpio is a fixed sign. It can be very determined, and where have these planets gone? These Scorpio planets, they've all gone into Sagittarius, and when Mercury moves out of Scorpio and goes into Sagittarius, you're going to have 4 planets in Sagittarius. So what does that mean for you? Well, it might mean, Aquarius, that you perhaps become more sociable than usual. I think you're going to value society, value the people you know. Maybe you don't have many friends, maybe you have lots of friends, but whatever the situation, you will value that social milieu, and it's going to be something that you're going to want to put a lot of energy into, particularly over the next few days, because these 4 planets in Sagittarius, Mercury, Sun, Venus, Mars, that emphasis is going to slightly weaken on Monday, on the 15th, because on the 15th Mars moves into Capricorn. So you're only going to have 3 planets in three planets in Aquarius, Sagittarius. And so over the next few days, try as far as possible to keep busy socially, and don't feel that you have to always be in control. You have to be the one making the decisions. Perhaps other people are going to organize things, and if you have a chance to go to parties, other group gatherings, I think that's probably the right thing to do. I mean, to begin with, you might have your doubts, because today, you're aware perhaps of the importance of your social life, but also, with the moon moving through Virgo, you're aware that there are other things going on that maybe you feel you need to attend to. There may be a certain temptation to make things overcomplicated, to just think, you've got to sort out this and you've got to sort out that, and who knows what might happen. You don't want to make yourself vulnerable, so you've got to make sure that you've covered all your bases, all that kind of thing. So there is some caution today, but this caution is not going to last forever. By tomorrow, the moon moves into Libra, and so that's going to make you sort of more open and more open to new things and new ideas. But I'm thinking perhaps with this emphasis on and Sagittarius and just how long it lasts for. So Friday, Saturday, Sunday are the days where you've really got 4 planets in Sagittarius. So that may say something about your planning, Aquarius. What you're trying to organize for yourself, and if you can put some emphasis on your social life, I think that would be a good thing. You don't want to put too much emphasis though, and you certainly don't want to trust anyone completely. I mean, it is a time when you could be confused and undermined, but only if you were to believe what someone says. If you were to take what someone says at face value, and you're not going to do that, are you? I mean, as an Aquarius, as I often say, you're quite independent-minded. You can think for yourself. You don't want to be in a situation where other people are thinking for you. And if you remember that, Aquarius, then I think that the next few days can be quite fun, ideally. But then there's this question. I don't know about your particular situation. I'm just looking at it with the assumption that you have friends and so forth, but not everyone has friends. I don't think I've got any friends, do I? I mean, I've probably got about one friend. But then I'm not an Aquarius. But what if it's just you? Then what? Okay, but you might talk about online contacts, but even then, that may not be what it's about. But there's another way of looking at these planets in Sagittarius, and this part of the chart is often connected with the future. I mean, at least in the Aquarian chart, a lot of emphasis on the future and how you are perceiving the future. What are your ideas about the future? And the future is not the same as ambitions. Ambitions, one has material ambitions. One wants to achieve A, B, and C in terms of money and status. And that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the future in terms of the flow of your life. And so when you think about the flow of your life with these 4 planets in Sagittarius over the next couple of days, you may get some insights. You may have a chance to ask yourself, where is your life going? If you were to do nothing, where would it all end up? Where do you expect it to end up? And you can look at this in a way that is quite realistic. And if you think that your life is going to end up somewhere that you're not entirely satisfied with, because you have to kind of look at it almost statistically. In a life which, remember, the average life, there are only about 6 or 7 big events. That's the way it is for everyone. And so you perhaps have a chance now to imagine this future and perhaps to consider ways of making a change. What single thing would you have to change your future, assuming you wanted to change your future? And this could be a very private process. This doesn't involve other people necessarily. So that might be another way of dealing with the day's energies. So I think it's important, the fact that 4 planets are going to be in Sagittarius, regardless of the situation, regardless of whether you're a highly sociable person or whether you spend all your time on your own. It still matters. And also I think it's still going to be very, very constructive for you. Pisces. Mercury is making a trine to Neptune, and this aspect may be one of the most important aspects of the day. It's a gentle aspect. It's a trine. It's easy. It's maybe has an optionality to it. You don't have to get into this Mercury trine Neptune if you don't want to. But one way of looking at Mercury trine Neptune is to say that it's quite sensitive and it's quite Pisces. It's quite a Pisces friendly trine. It is sensitive, it's emotional, and it allows you to feel what's going on around you. Your feelings are strong, and at the same time, it's about communication and channels of communication. So you can pick things up that maybe other people miss. Remember, Neptune is in Pisces, it's in your sign, and so with Mercury making a trine to Neptune, you can become aware of all sorts of different things, and you're going to be someone who is difficult to fool. You'll see everything, you'll feel everything, and if it's possible to read someone's mind, then perhaps that's something you can do. Of course, if you know that you've got psychic abilities anyway, then Mercury trine Neptune should emphasize it. But it is a trine, and the one problem of a trine is that sometimes things can just be too easy, just picking up a lot of information, so much information that the channels could just be overwhelmed. And so you do need a little bit of discernment, not too much discernment, but maybe with Moon in Virgo at the moment, that does allow you to work out what's important and what's not important, but in an open-minded way. What you don't want is your impressions of the world to be fixed by your own opinions and your own prejudices. I mean, that shouldn't happen, but I'm just saying there's a small chance that it could happen. So Mercury trine Neptune, I think, is a good aspect, provided you use it in the right way, and that you're just aware that, you are sensitive, but you don't want to be oversensitive. And maybe with Mercury trine Neptune, you should avoid talking too much. Instead, do the listening, do the feeling. And then Mercury changes sign. It moves into Sagittarius. So Mercury moving into Sagittarius, well, that means they're going to have 4 planets in Sagittarius. And with 4 planets in Sagittarius, that says something very different from the Mercury trine Neptune. It can be about your ambitions. What are your ambitions? What are you trying to achieve? What are you trying to get together? And you can be quite imaginative, and you can have sort of great leaps of sort of feeling and believing what is possible, and being inspired as well. So I think that these 4 planets in Sagittarius could be very motivating. And you're going to have 4 planets in Sagittarius until Monday the 15th, because then Mars moves out of Sagittarius into Capricorn. But while you've got these 4 planets, the 4 personal planets in Sagittarius, then do make the most of it. If you believe that something is possible, if you have an ambition that you cherish, something you want to happen, then it can happen at some level. Maybe in the past you'd looked at your ambitions and you'd looked at what you wanted to do and you'd thought it was impossible, but it can happen. And you have to perhaps believe it, or just know it. If you know that something is possible, then I think, Pisces, you can make it possible. And in the process, you might have to be a real sort of individual. It's not a time for just drifting along with the tide. You have to take a stand. You have to be yourself. And once you do that, then you'll find that people do take notice of you. And even if they aren't taking notice of you, you have what it takes to achieve whatever it is that you want to achieve. And those are my forecasts for the 12 signs. And now it's time to look at things from the viewpoint of the I Ching. So I ask the question, what is Thursday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 37, which is the family. This hexagram, the family, has been coming up quite a lot recently. And as I say about the family, it is about the group. It may not be literally the family. It's whatever group we're closely involved with. It could be our friends. It's often connected with the clan. What is our clan? And when you're talking about being part of a group, you have a role, and it is quite traditional because, from a Chinese perspective, the family is the root of everything, and relations within the family need to be maintained. And people need to know their roles, and that is the nature of a structure like a family or a clan. There is a hierarchy, and I think that is perhaps the nature of this. Now, I know that the modern Western family may not be hierarchical, so we have to slightly moderate that. Where there is a hierarchy, we need to respect that, and if there is no hierarchy, maybe there should be a hierarchy. Remember, this is I Ching. This is not something that we can sort of completely modernize and make it completely sort of supposedly up to date with modern values. We have to get back to basics here. So as far as what this means is, today your role in the hierarchy may be important, and you may be very aware of that role, or perhaps more aware than usual. And we have 3 moving lines, and the second line moves. Second line from the bottom moves, and this kind of indicates that role is very much important. And if you have a role in the family, you need to stick with that role and not try to usurp it. So if you're expected to just do your duty, whatever that duty might be, obviously within reason, but you don't have to complain. Obviously, I know that one shouldn't be advocating that kind of subservience, but you do have to look at this in a collective way. And you shouldn't forget this is a Confucian oracle. It is about understanding your duty and not feeling you have to be an individual. That you have to what you mustn't do is try to force the pace, because if you force the pace and you demand attention, you will be upsetting the structure of the family. And right now that matters. And it might be that there are forces that are trying to upset the family, because the third line moves as well. So we've had the third line of the family moving very recently, and with the third line, it could be that something is wrong, someone is misbehaving, or someone is behaving in a way that is ever so slightly disrespectful. And the I Ching tells us that in this situation, it is better to be harsh than to be lenient. So if something or someone is out of control or starting to be out of control, you need to take immediate action. Or if someone is perhaps usurping their role, trying to break the hierarchy, things have to get back to normal. And if you just do nothing, if you just tolerate a transgression, then it's going to get worse and you might lose respect. And so what do you need to do to maintain respect? And I think it is better to be harsh. It's better to express your opinions and to tell someone that they're out of order than rather just to tolerate things. Because once you tolerate things, you lose respect and you may not be able to get that respect back. And respect continues to be the theme. The top line moves, and it's not a bad line, the top line, but it's remembering that's what you're trying to do. And if you act in the right way, you can gain everyone's respect, and most importantly, you can maintain the order and maintain the hierarchy. And with those 3 lines moving, we move to a second hexagram, and we move to hexagram number 60, which is limitation. So it's kind of more of the same. I mean, limitation is about restraining oneself, not restraining oneself to the point of making things hurt. So, you can, for example, make some changes to your diet if need be, if it's the right thing to do, if it's medically okay. But you don't want to make changes to your diet that are complete agony. You don't want to be too harsh. So that is a thing about limitation. If it's, the I Ching said that if it's galling limitation, well, that's not what you want, because if a limitation hurts, if it's white knuckle limitation, then the question is, how long are you going to be able to handle it before you break? And of course, when you break, of course, everything goes out of a window and there's no limitation whatsoever. So, everything in moderation, limitation in moderation. But still, it is a hexagram that is talking about discipline. And so over the course of the day, discipline and structure are going to be important. And it's not very interesting. It's not very exciting, but that's not what today is about. It's just making sure that everything is under control, and of course that the hierarchy is maintained. So now I want to finish by looking at the astrology. We got two events. There are other events, but we have got Mercury moving into Sagittarius, and we've got the last quarter moon. So I wanted to start off by looking at the last quarter moon. So here is the chart of the last quarter moon. So this last quarter moon takes place at 8:52, I think 8:52 p.m. On Thursday the 11th, and you can see that the moon is at 20 degrees 4 Virgo, and the sun is at 20 degrees 04 Sagittarius. So we had a new moon. What was it? November the 22nd or 21st. I think that was when the new moon was. If I remember rightly, the 20th. So we had a new moon on the 20th at around 28 Sagittarius, and now the new moon has developed, and we have this last quarter, and things have changed. The sun is now in Sagittarius, and so there is perhaps something that needs to be done before this lunation cycle comes to an end. And the new moon started with the sun in Scorpio, now in Sagittarius. So you could say that sun in Sagittarius represents the vision. It's what we wanted to complete. We had an idea about what we could achieve in this lunar cycle. And the moon in Virgo is squaring it. So what might that mean? It might mean that there is something that needs to be sorted out, perhaps of the nature of Virgo, some set of tasks. It's perhaps rather boring, maybe, because it's Moon in Virgo, but it has to be done in order for the overall vision to be realized. And the sooner we get it together, the better. So that might be a theme of this last quarter moon. But we do want to have a better understanding of the last quarter moon, and so under those circumstances it might be a good idea to look at the midpoints. So if we look at the 90-degree dial of the last quarter moon, so when you look at the 90-degree dial, that will mean that, because this shows conjunctions, squares and oppositions all as conjunctions, we will see that the sun and the moon appear to be conjunct, well, they are conjunct on the 90-degree dial. So as far as the midpoints are concerned, so these are the midpoints that the new moon is on. So this new moon is conjunct the Venus-Mars midpoint, and it's also conjunct the Venus-Saturn midpoint. And that's a reminder that the Mars-Saturn square is still with us. It hasn't gone away. So there's the Mars and Saturn. And Mars and Saturn are not quite as close as they used to be, but Venus is now on the other side of the new moon. So you could break it down. So this what's new moon? I mean, so last quarter moon on the Venus Mars midpoint. Well, that can be about attraction. Last quarter moon may be about how people try to present themselves, and as it's a last quarter moon, there is perhaps a last chance to attract someone's attention. But you might hold back because this last quarter moon is also on the Venus-Saturn midpoint. So the question is, how do you deal with that? Do you hold back, or do you find a way of breaking through? So it could actually be, this last quarter moon, be quite a lot about relationships of all kinds, and relationships can be perhaps strengthened with the last quarter moon on the Venus Mars midpoint. And it might be a last chance to attract someone's attention, but it's also this Venus Saturn, and Venus Saturn is potentially a difficult energy, and it just might be that there is an emotional issue, just not being able to fully express oneself. One can see the possibilities of making a connection of another person, but someone is holding things back. So with this last quarter moon, there could be urgency. We want to get something done. Maybe we want to get to know people. But the question is, can we get to know people? Can we get closer to people? Because with this Venus-Saturn, there could be a lot of restraint. And so maybe with this last quarter moon, it's important to think about what you're trying to achieve. It's a time to get close to certain people. They may be important for whatever reason, but don't try to get too close. This is not about emotional closeness. It's just about finding a connection and then seeing what happens afterwards. So that might be a way in which we can look at this last quarter moon. But last quarter moons are not especially unusual, and I'm not saying that it's a hugely significant event. And then we have Mercury moving into Sagittarius. So here is the moment that Mercury moves into Sagittarius. So when you're talking about Mercury moving into Sagittarius, is this a good thing or a bad thing? I mean, one problem about Mercury moving into Sagittarius is that Mercury is in its detriment, because Mercury rules Gemini. So Mercury in Sagittarius, this is not really somewhere where Mercury works. It's not a sign where Mercury works well. I mean, I know a lot of people have Mercury in Sagittarius. It's not exactly unusual, and if one's making generalizations about people's horoscopes, you have to look at other things. Is Mercury combust? What other planets are involved? Is it in mutual reception with Jupiter? In this case, Mercury is not in mutual reception to Jupiter. But Mercury likes to be able to work things out. It's into ideas. It's not so much into the big vision. It might try, with Mercury in Sagittarius, we might be encouraged to have a big idea, a big vision, but very often it can be flawed, and there might not just be sufficient grounding. And that's why Mercury in Sagittarius can be a bit sort of crazy and speculative. I mean, that is possible. Getting excited about something, but not really thinking it through. There might just be an absence of common sense with Mercury moving into Sagittarius, and maybe this is further emphasized by the fact that Mercury is going to be trine Neptune and conjunct an opposition Uranus. So you could say that Mercury is when Mercury moves into Sagittarius, the opposition with Uranus starts to lose its strength, because, and likewise with Mercury making Mercury is trine to Neptune, but it's still very much there. It does colour Mercury's movement into Sagittarius, and it just emphasizes perhaps the craziness and people's ideas. What kind of ideas are people having when Mercury moves into Sagittarius? Now, as private individuals, we're allowed to have our crazy ideas, and very often nothing happens. But the more powerful someone is, the more concerning it is if they have a crazy idea. And I'm probably reading too much into Mercury moving into Sagittarius, but there just could be a sense of urgency here, that people feel this is a time they have to express their craziness. And the reason I'm saying that is because Mercury moves into Sagittarius at the same time as we have this last quarter moon. I was just talking about the last quarter moon. So Mercury moves into Sagittarius at 10:40, so the last 10:40 p.m. London time. The last quarter moon was at 8:52, so that's sort of less than 2 hours after the last quarter moon, and that last quarter moon is still very much in operation. So it just could be that over the next couple of days, as Mercury moves into Sagittarius, suddenly things change. People really want action. They want results, and there could just be pressure with that last quarter moon. So watch out for people who are impatient. Okay, maybe you're going to be impatient. It's got to be done now or never. But what has got to be done? And what shortcuts have to be taken? So we have to be very aware of that. We don't want to get caught out by taking what seems to be a shortcut, and it could be a recipe for disaster. So it's just important that we keep our cool and we are patient. But as private individuals, we should be able to do that. It's more concerning, when you've got people who do have power, like politicians. They want a resolution. They feel they've got to push things through. Maybe they want to get it all done by the new year, by Christmas. But if they're too hasty, then things could go wrong. They could go badly wrong. So is Mercury in Sagittarius a good thing? I think it's exciting. It's interesting. If you're a private individual, if you're a politician or someone with power, then it may be ever so slightly worrisome. So thank you very much for watching this video. I hope you found it useful. If you did enjoy this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there's a link in the description. And I will talk to you again tomorrow.